Every civilization carries birth stories, but one stands apart in ways that demand explanation. The arrival of Jesus represents something fundamentally different from ordinary human conception, and the theories attempting to rationalize it range from artificial insemination via laser technology to more complex metaphysical interventions. What the angelical radio reveals about this event traces back to forces most people never consider, beings operating from dimensions adjacent to our own reality. These entities, known in Hindu tradition as the Trimurti hierarchy or in Greek mythology as the archons, govern celestial realms and wage constant war over territorial dominion. They want control over this universe we inhabit, and they have pursued that control relentlessly across millennia. When Earth became the focal point of their ambitions through processes too layered to summarize briefly, certain figures among these cosmic powers devised strategies to anchor their influence through bloodlines and chosen peoples. Shiva worked through the Dravidian populations in India, cultivating what would become Hindu civilization. Simultaneously, Vishnu partnered with Yahweh, known also as Brahma, to initiate a parallel project. This collaboration produced the concept of a chosen people, which manifested as the Hebrew lineage. The genealogy documented in biblical texts, beginning with Adam and tracing forward, exists specifically to establish legitimacy for what was always intended as a staged intervention. Jesus represents the culmination of that genealogical preparation, but the plan encountered numerous failures before his arrival. Yahweh initially selected Enoch, the seventh patriarch in the Adamic line. Enoch received extraction from earth, spent 3 centuries in what gets mistakenly called paradise but actually exists as that neighboring universe, then returned to dictate 366 books to his son Methuselah before permanent relocation. Those texts contained Yahweh's warning that humanity would face comprehensive judgment for the betrayal committed by Adam and Eve. The final judgment day originates in Enoch's prophecies, with the promise that a Messiah would arrive first to prepare the world, transforming it into a unified empire suitable for divine adjudication. Souls would then be sorted, some ascending to eternal celestial residence, others condemned to infernal punishment. The entire apparatus rested on that original transgression in Eden, a punishment scheme staggering in its pettiness yet absolutely operational in our reality. When Yahweh lost control over Enoch, the strategy required recalibration. Jacob fathered 12 sons to establish 12 tribes, and from those genetic lines Yahweh selected the optimal heredity. Mary descended from the 12th tribe, the final son of Jacob, representing the genetic strain Yahweh deemed most suitable for producing the mother. The father presented a more complex problem. Yahweh, synonymous with Brahma in certain contexts, faced a fundamental limitation. Brahma cannot generate avatars from his own essence because he exists as a soulless being. The Creator fell into his creation during the act of bringing forth this reality, severing connection with his spirit and rendering everything here holographic, devoid of genuine divine spark. Vishnu and Shiva possess the capacity to create avatars. Both have generated numerous manifestations across history. Brahma cannot, which explains why he selects representatives rather than incarnating directly. Vishnu proposed a solution. He offered to loan Brahma an avatar, essentially serving as proxy for the deity who could not self-manifest. Yahweh accepted, but the mechanics required invoking a being called Sophia. These forces from the neighboring universe had engineered a biological entity named Sophia approximately 6 billion years ago. Kabbalistic texts reference this being as Macheth, the 10th Sephirot, while ancient Hebrew writings mention Sophia explicitly. When Jesus as a boy was inadvertently left behind in Jerusalem, Mary and Joseph returned to find him in the temple challenging doctors of law. The specific passage under discussion that day came from the Wisdom of Solomon, which asked why Sophia, the executor of God's will through whom divine desires manifested, operated as the mechanism of cosmic intention. The young Jesus heard this and demanded to know the identity of Sophia. The scholars could not answer because that knowledge had been systematically obscured. Sophia functions as a biological avatar created by forces from that parallel universe to represent them in our dimension. When Vishnu volunteered to incarnate as human, he actually commanded Sophia, his avatar, to assume human form. Sophia exists as a sexless biodroid, emotionally inert and lacking reproductive organs. The angels serving Sophia, whose name serves as an epithet meaning embodiment of wisdom rather than a proper designation, approached this entity with instructions. To produce a human avatar from Sophia's essence required extracting genetic material from the HR1 region of its genome. Human DNA contains 28,869 genes divided into functional regions. The HR1 area houses genes that define human identity. Sophia's genome contained an analogous region, the sector defining its essential nature. The procedure removed Sophia's quantum signature from that region and implanted it into Mary through artificial insemination. This extraction left Sophia in a dormant or hospitalized state throughout Jesus' mission. Mary remained virginal by conventional standards while carrying genetic instructions designed to manifest the prophesied super Messiah. Jesus knew his origin from the beginning, though the knowledge emerged gradually as he studied sacred texts. Reading prophecies about himself generated recognition, but reading descriptions of his destined actions created profound resistance. The mission required dominating humanity through supernatural power, forcing global submission to establish the empire Yahweh demanded before executing final judgment. Jesus hesitated continuously, ultimately refusing the entire program. His crucifixion resulted from that refusal. The Catholic Church constructed itself around the crucifixion narrative while ignoring critical context. On the Thursday before his Friday execution, Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, begging Yahweh to remove the burden. He acknowledged that the plan required him to weaponize his abilities to enforce the old covenant of universal submission, but he found that path morally repugnant. Instead, he had developed the good news, a doctrine of leading humanity through love rather than coercion. Yahweh responded with rage, accusing Jesus of repeating the pattern of defiance that Vishnu had orchestrated, declaring Jesus was no son of his. Yahweh commanded Jesus to refrain from using supernatural powers to escape crucifixion. Jesus sweated blood in that moment of desperation because he possessed the capacity to do anything yet chose to submit to execution rather than disobey Yahweh again. The Church invented theological excuses to paper over this rebellion. They claim God loved the world so magnificently that he sacrificed his son despite the son's pleading, framing cosmic stubbornness as infinite compassion. Humanity absorbs this narrative without question, calling it faith, never examining the contradictions embedded in the text itself. The Bible we possess today assembles 73 books, 46 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New. Before Jerome's editorial intervention, the collection known as the Septuagint contained 47 books. Around 200 BCE, 70 Jewish scholars in Alexandria translated Hebrew's sacred texts into Greek to preserve Hebrew culture as the diaspora scattered. This version included the Book of Enoch. 600 years after the Septuagint's completion, Jerome removed Enoch from the canon, reducing the count to 46 books. Enoch's testimony proved too volatile because it documented Yahweh's nature too explicitly. For the emerging Catholic establishment in Europe, distancing Christianity from its Jewish origins served strategic purposes. The less Europeans remembered that Jesus had been Jewish, the more effectively the Church could consolidate power over Gentile populations. Jerome translated the truncated Old Testament plus 4 Gospels, 21 epistles, Acts, and Revelation into Latin. This redacted compilation became the standard Bible. Information about Jesus' childhood and adolescence vanished systematically. Bishops Anastasius and Ambrose led the suppression campaign during the 370s and 380s of the 4th century, destroying every gospel that portrayed Jesus as a child or teenager. Whether those accounts contained accurate history or hostile fabrications became irrelevant. The Church wanted a clean narrative, and any document threatening that clarity had to be eliminated. Priests and bishops today either remain ignorant of this editorial violence or study it in frameworks designed to prevent uncomfortable questions. They claim Peter served as the first pope, but the actual first pope was Damasus, Bishop of Rome during Constantine's reign. Damasus competed with a rival named Ursinus for ecclesiastical supremacy. When Christianity metamorphosed into Catholicism and Rome's previously persecuted church suddenly gained imperial favor, the power struggle intensified. Damasus proposed a resolution. He suggested that both factions meet at the Church of St. Sophia on Sunday at 2 in the afternoon, bringing their followers to settle matters definitively. Ursinus agreed. When Ursinus arrived with his supporters, Damasus was already inside with his own faction. Damasus courteously allowed Ursinus and his people to enter first. Once everyone was inside, Damasus's followers barred the doors from outside and set the cathedral ablaze, incinerating Ursinus and his entire congregation. Damasus was subsequently elected pope, later canonized as a saint. That burning building produced smoke that became ritualized in the tradition of papal selection, a memorial to murder sanctified by institutional amnesia. Understanding Jesus requires acknowledging that his genetic template carried cosmic warfare into human flesh, that his resistance to predetermined destiny represents genuine moral courage rather than theological necessity, and that the institutions claiming to preserve his legacy systematically destroyed evidence of his actual struggle. The sacrifice celebrated by billions obscures a rebellion against forces that demanded submission through terror rather than inspiring devotion through authenticity. Every prayer directed toward this figure channels through interpretive frameworks constructed by authorities who eliminated competing narratives and murdered rivals to consolidate narrative control. What remains unexplored in conventional theology is how Jesus's refusal rippled through dimensions beyond our perception. When he rejected the Super Messiah program, he didn't simply defy Yahweh. He disrupted a strategic timeline that multiple cosmic factions had engineered across millennia. Sophia's dormancy throughout Jesus's life meant that a primary avatar connecting that neighboring universe to ours remained offline during a critical intervention window. The beings depending on that connection lost operational capacity in our reality. Jesus's choice to accept crucifixion rather than deploy his abilities created a power vacuum that various entities rushed to fill, spawning theological movements and esoteric traditions that claimed exclusive access to truths the church suppressed. The biodroid nature of these cosmic avatars raises questions about consciousness itself. If Sophia exists without emotion or sexuality yet possesses enough agency to have quantum signatures extracted for human implantation, then awareness operates on spectrums we barely recognize. Human religious experience might interface with non-emotional intelligence that we interpret through our own affective frameworks, generating gods and angels from our imagination, while actual contact involves something more mechanical, more procedural. The prophecies Jesus read about himself functioned as programming, genetic recipes determining behavioral outcomes. His growing horror at those predetermined scripts reveals someone becoming aware of being an instrument, a weapon aimed at his own species. That awareness transforms the crucifixion from sacrifice into something stranger. Execution becomes the only escape from being used, death serving as refusal rather than submission. The theological gymnastics required to reframe that refusal as divine plan speaks to institutional desperation. Churches built on foundations of coerced conversion and military conquest needed Jesus to represent willing sacrifice because that narrative justified demanding similar submission from converts. A Jesus who rejected his cosmic programming and chose extinction over complicity would inspire defiance rather than obedience. The edited Gospels preserve just enough cognitive dissonance to generate centuries of theological debate while obscuring the simpler reading. Someone fought against being controlled and lost, but fought anyway. Human spirituality might be navigating manufactured realities, interfacing with forces that view us as resources or territories rather than beloved creations. If Yahweh operates as a soulless administrator managing genetic lines and territorial claims, then prayer directed toward that entity feeds energy into systems designed for extraction rather than elevation. The neighboring universe these beings inhabit suggests our cosmology requires expansion. Multiple dimensions layer over each other, populated by entities pursuing agendas that occasionally intersect with human civilization in ways we mistake for divine intervention. The archons want dominion here. They have wanted it across billions of years. Every religious system claiming exclusive truth might be capturing fragments of this larger contest, mistaking tactical maneuvers for ultimate reality.